Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The air in Port Charles was heavy with tension as word spread that Ronnie was leaving town. For weeks, whispers had circulated about his mysterious behavior, his late-night disappearances, and the guilt written all over his face. No one could quite figure out what was going on until now. It was Tracy, of all people, who found herself caught in the storm that Ronnie was about to unleash before his final departure. She never expected her day to unfold with a confession that would leave her shaken to the core, nor did she imagine that the truth would change her perspective about loyalty, guilt, and redemption forever. The morning began as any other in the Quartermaine mansion, chaotic, loud, and filled with sharp banter that bounced off the marble floors. Tracy was in her usual commanding form, giving orders to the staff, checking her phone for updates on ELQ, and rolling her eyes at the latest antics of her family members. But deep down, she couldn't shake the odd feeling that something was brewing. The tension had been simmering for days, and she felt it in her gut, a sense that someone was about to come to her with a problem too big to ignore. When the doorbell rang, she barely looked up from her tablet and muttered, "If it's another delivery for Brooklyn, just send it away." But when the butler returned a moment later and said, "It's Ronnie, Ms. Quartermaine." "He says it's urgent," Tracy's expression shifted. "Ronnie who?" she demanded, irritated by the interruption. Then it clicked, the detective, the one who had been circling around Sonny's orbit, the one who had a complicated history with half the people in Port Charles. "Fine," she sighed, "send him in. But make it quick." Ronnie entered quietly, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that immediately caught Tracy's attention. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed, his shoulders weighed down as though he'd been carrying a secret too long. "Tracy," he said softly, "I didn't know who else to turn to." That line alone piqued her curiosity. "Well, that's a first," she replied sharply, setting her tablet aside. "Most people don't come to me when they're in trouble, they come to me when they need money or a favor." "Which one is it this time?" Ronnie gave a half-hearted smile but didn't answer. Instead, he began pacing the room, his hand running through his hair as he muttered under his breath, "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living with it." Tracy folded her arms. "If you're here to confess to me like I'm your priest, you've come to the wrong place. I don't do absolution." Ronnie stopped and looked at her, his voice trembling slightly. "You might want to sit down for this." Tracy arched a brow. "I'll stand, thank you. Now start talking before I lose my patience." He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Tracy, I did something. Something that's been haunting me for years." That got her attention. "Oh, wonderful," she said with biting sarcasm. "Another tortured soul with regrets. What did you do, Ronnie? Forget to pay your parking tickets?" He ignored her jab. "It's not a joke," he said quietly. "A long time ago, when Franco was running around town, there was a case I was involved in, one that went sideways because of me. I covered it up. Someone got hurt, and someone else took the fall." Tracy's sharp demeanor softened slightly, her curiosity overcoming her instinct to dismiss him. "You're telling me you covered up a crime? Why are you coming to me with this?" Ronnie swallowed hard. "Because the person who got hurt, it was someone close to you. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was connected to your family." The words hit her like a slap. "You'd better start explaining before I throw you out." He nodded, his voice breaking as he began recounting the story. "It was years ago. There was a warehouse deal gone bad. We were supposed to bring in a suspect who had stolen evidence from a case connected to Sonny's operation. Things spiraled out of control, and there was a struggle. The man we were chasing went down, hard. I thought he was dead. I panicked. Instead of calling it in, I moved the body, made it look like he'd run. But someone else was blamed for the disappearance, someone innocent." Tracy's eyes narrowed. "Who?" she demanded. Ronnie hesitated, then whispered, "Luke." The name alone made her flinch. "My brother?" she breathed out, her voice caught between disbelief and anger. You're telling me you framed Luke for something you did? Ronnie nodded, his face twisted with regret. It wasn't supposed to go that way. The investigation led to him because of his connection to the location. I should have come forward, but I was scared of losing my badge, my career, everything. Tracy was silent for a long moment, her mind spinning. She remembered the chaos that followed that period, Luke's erratic behavior, the rumors, the strain on the family. Do you have any idea what that did to him? She finally said, her tone icy. Luke nearly destroyed himself over the guilt of things he didn't even do. And you're standing here telling me it was your fault? Ronnie's eyes filled with tears. Yes. And that's why I'm here. Before I leave town, I need to set the record straight. I can't leave Port Charles carrying this secret anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. Tracy turned away, her hand trembling as she tried to process the weight of what she'd just heard. Why now? She asked finally. Why after all these years? Ronnie looked down. Because I'm dying. The words fell like a thunderclap. I got the diagnosis a few months ago, he continued quietly. It's aggressive. There's no time left for me to make things right, except this. Tracy's composure faltered for the first time. You're telling me you came here to confess a crime, ruin your own reputation, and reopen old wounds because you're dying? Ronnie nodded. I have to clear my conscience, Tracy. I can't meet my end knowing I let someone else suffer for my mistake. For once, Tracy didn't have a snarky reply. She studied him for a long moment, the faintest flicker of empathy in her eyes. You're braver than most, she said softly, surprising even herself. But you realize this confession, if it goes public, will cause chaos. The PCPD won't just let it go. Ronnie gave a weary smile. I know. I already turned in my resignation. I'm leaving town tonight. I just wanted to tell you personally before I go. Tracy exhaled sharply. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. He chuckled faintly. Guess I learned from the best. You Quartermains know a thing or two about drama. The door creaked open slightly, and Brooklyn's voice echoed from the hall. Grandmother, is everything okay? Tracy quickly composed herself. Everything's fine, dear. Go back to whatever chaos you were creating. When Brooklyn disappeared, Tracy turned back to Ronnie. You're really leaving Port Charles for good? He nodded. Yeah. I've already packed up. No one else knows, except you. She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, and what do you expect me to do with this information? Ronnie sighed. Whatever you think is right. Tell the truth, bury it, expose it, it's not my place to decide anymore. I just needed to tell someone who deserved to know. Tracy stared at the floor, lost in thought. You know, she said finally, Luke always said there was more to that night than anyone believed. He told me he felt something was off. And now you're confirming it. Maybe this is his vindication, too late, perhaps, but still. Ronnie's voice softened. I just wanted to give you that. The truth. She nodded slowly. You've done that. But don't think for a second that absolves you. You cost my brother years of peace. Ronnie's voice broke. I know. And if I could trade places with him, I would. The clock ticked softly in the background, the sound filling the stillness between them. Finally, Tracy stepped closer. Where are you going? She asked. Out west, he said. Somewhere quiet. I don't want to make a spectacle of my exit. She gave him a long, piercing look, her expression a mix of disdain and reluctant compassion. You've always been a complicated man, Ronnie. But I'll say this, owning up to your mistakes takes courage. Maybe that's the only redemption you'll get. He smiled faintly. I'll take it. As he turned to leave, she called out, Ronnie. He paused at the door. Yes? She hesitated, then said softly, for what it's worth, thank you for telling me. Ronnie gave her one last nod before walking out, his footsteps echoing through the Quartermain mansion like a ghost fading into the distance. Tracy stood there for a long time after he was gone, staring at the doorway. A part of her wanted to call the police, to expose the truth and finally clear Luke's name publicly. But another part of her, the side that had seen too many lives destroyed by old secrets, knew that sometimes closure came in silence. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. "You always did find the strangest ways to say goodbye," she murmured under her breath. Hours later, as night settled over Port Charles, word quietly spread that Ronnie had left town. No one knew where he'd gone, only that he had turned in his badge and disappeared. Some thought he'd finally had enough of the endless drama that consumed the town, others suspected there was more to the story. But Tracy knew the truth. She sat alone in the Quartermain living room, a glass of scotch in hand, thinking about the man who had come to her seeking forgiveness. She couldn't give him that, not completely, but she could give him understanding. And that, perhaps, was the closest thing to peace either of them would ever find. As she raised her glass toward the empty room, she whispered softly, "To the truth, no matter how late it arrives." Somewhere out there, Ronnie drove into the night, leaving behind the lights of Port Charles, the ghosts of his mistakes, and the faint hope that his confession might finally right an old wrong. The chapter had closed not with fireworks or fanfare, but with quiet honesty, a rare thing in Port Charles. And for Tracy Quartermain, it was one more reminder that in this town, secrets never truly stay buried, but sometimes, telling the truth, however painful, was the only way to finally say goodbye. The air in the hospital corridor was thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken anxieties. For Tracy Quartermain, it was a familiar perfume, the background aroma of a life perpetually tangled in the high-stakes dramas of family, fortune, and the general hospital. She moved with a purpose, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the linoleum floor that was both a declaration of her presence and a warning to anyone who might impede her path. She was on her way to a board meeting she had no desire to attend, her mind already rehearsing the sharp-tongued rebuttals she would inevitably have to deploy against the latest in a long line of fools who thought they could outmaneuver a Quartermain. It was in this state of focused irritation that she nearly collided with him. Ronnie was leaning against a wall just outside the bustling nurses' station, looking less like a man waiting for an appointment and more like a ghost who had forgotten how to move on. His usual swagger, that cheap, oily confidence he wore like a knockoff cologne, was gone. In its place was a pallor, a profound stillness that made Tracy stop dead in her tracks. "Ronnie," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Surprise always made her brittle. "What are you doing lurking out here? You look like you've seen one of your own creditors." He flinched, a slight, almost imperceptible twitch that confirmed her initial assessment. Something was very wrong. His eyes, usually darting around in search of opportunity or an easy mark, were fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. "I need to talk to you, Tracy," he said, his voice low and raspy, stripped of its characteristic bluster. "Somewhere private. Now." She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Whatever it is, it can wait. I have a meeting in 5 minutes where I fully intend to eviscerate a man who thinks fiduciary responsibility is a type of yacht. You can buy me a drink later and regale me with your latest scheme." She made to move past him, but his hand shot out, not touching her, but barring her way. The gesture was so uncharacteristically desperate that she felt a cold trickle of apprehension slide down her spine. This wasn't a play for money. This wasn't one of his convoluted plots. This was something else entirely. "Please," he said, and the word sounded foreign and painful in his mouth. "Tracy. There is no later for me." The finality in his tone was absolute. She studied his face, the sweat beading on his upper lip, the tremor in the hand he still held out, the raw fear in his eyes. With a sigh that was part exasperation and part genuine, dawning concern, she nodded curtly. "My office," she said. 5 minutes. And this had better be good. The walk to her office was silent and heavy. Tracy was acutely aware of Ronnie trailing behind her, a silent, shuffling shadow. She pushed the door open, the sanctum of mahogany and leather offering a stark contrast to the sterile chaos of the hallway. She didn't sit behind her desk, a power move she usually relished. Instead, she leaned against the front of it, crossing her arms, a queen awaiting a troubling report from a disgraced courtier. "Well?" she prompted, when he simply stood there, staring at his own shoes. "The clock is ticking, Ronnie. Spit it out. What's got you so spooked? Did one of your back alley deals finally come back to bite you?" He finally looked up, and his gaze was so full of anguish that Tracy's breath hitched in her throat. This was beyond a financial mishap. This was soul deep. "It's not about a deal, Tracy," he began, his voice cracking. It's about a crime." The word hung in the air between them, tangible and ugly. Tracy's mind, always racing, began to cycle through possibilities. Embezzlement? Theft? Something with the mob? Nothing seemed to fit the level of sheer terror radiating from him. "What have you done, Ronnie?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He started to pace, a caged animal in a too small room. "It was a long time ago. A lifetime ago. I was a different person. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I was desperate, up to my neck in debts to people who don't send reminder letters. They send broken bones." "Get to the point," Tracy said, though her usual impatience was now laced with a growing dread. "I needed money. A lot of it. And I saw an opportunity. It was a business rival. A guy named Markham. He wasn't a saint, but he was in my way. And he had a safe full of cash from a deal he was about to close." Ronnie stopped pacing and leaned his hands on the back of a leather armchair, his knuckles white. "I decided to rob it. I cased the place for days. It was a warehouse office, down by the docks. Isolated. I knew he'd be there late, counting the money, getting it ready for the next day." Tracy listened, her expression unreadable, but her heart was beginning to hammer against her ribs. She had a terrible feeling she knew where this was going. "The plan was simple," Ronnie continued, his voice a monotone, as if reciting a story he'd memorized but never understood. "I'd wait until he was alone, I'd go in with a gun, it wasn't even loaded, Tracy, I swear, I just needed to scare him, I'd tie him up, take the money, and be gone. He'd be humiliated, I'd be solvent. A victimless crime." He let out a bitter, hollow laugh that held no humor. "There's no such thing as a victimless crime." "What happened, Ronnie?" Tracy's voice was barely audible. "It all went wrong. He was there, just like I thought. I got the drop on him. Had the gun on him, told him to open the safe. He fought back. He was stronger than he looked. We struggled. The gun, it went off." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant, muffled sound of the hospital paging system. Tracy stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. "It was an accident," Ronnie whispered, his eyes wide, seeing the scene play out not in the room, but in the haunted theater of his memory. "I never meant. God, I never meant for that to happen." But the bullet, it hit him. In the chest. There was so much blood. It was everywhere. On my hands, my clothes. I can still smell it sometimes, Tracy. I can still smell the blood and the gunpowder." Tracy felt the strength leave her legs. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "You killed him?" Ronnie nodded, a single, jerky movement. "He was dead before he hit the floor. I just stood there, staring at him. The money was right there, stacks of it in the open safe. But I couldn't move. I just kept looking at him. At what I'd done." The confession seemed to drain the last of his energy. He sank into the armchair, his body folding in on itself as if trying to disappear. "I ran. I left the money. I left everything. I just ran. I spent years looking over my shoulder, waiting for the police to show up. But they never did. They ruled it as a botched robbery by an unknown assailant. Markham had plenty of enemies. I was just one more ghost in the shadows." Tracy found her voice, though it was strained and unfamiliar. Why are you telling me this now? After all these years? Why unload this burden onto me? Because it's not over, he said, looking up at her, his eyes pleading for an understanding he knew he didn't deserve. The past isn't dead. It's not even past. Someone knows. The cold trickle of apprehension in Tracy's spine turned into a frozen river. Who? I don't know their name, Ronnie said, his voice trembling. But they found me. A few days ago. A note. Slid under my door. It had one line on it, I know what you did to Markham. Then, yesterday, a phone call. A distorted voice. They didn't ask for money. They said it was time to pay. That my time was up. He leaned forward, his expression one of pure, undiluted terror. They're not cops, Tracy. This is something else. Revenge. A relative, a partner. I don't know. But they're here, in Port Charles. And they're coming for me. I can feel it. So you're running, Tracy stated, the pieces clicking into place. The desperation, the fear, the final confession. That's what this is. This is your goodbye. I have to, he insisted, a frantic energy returning to him. I can't stay. If I stay, I'm a dead man. And it's not just me. This person, whoever they are, they mentioned you. Tracy froze. Me? What does any of this have to do with me? They know we're associated, he said, avoiding the complicated nature of their relationship, a tangled web of grudging affection, mutual exploitation, and a strange, cynical loyalty. The voice on the phone said, say goodbye to your friend, the Quartermain. They know about you, Tracy. And I can't. I can't drag you into this. My mess. My sin. The sheer, selfish nobility of it struck Tracy with the force of a physical blow. All these years, Ronnie had been a parasite, a charming, unreliable leech on the edges of her life. And now, in his final act, he was trying to protect her. He was confessing not for absolution, but as a warning. You can't just run from this, Tracy argued, her business instincts kicking in. We can go to the police. We can get protection. My family has resources. No, he barked, the sound sharp in the quiet room. No police. No resources. That's what they want. Any attention, any investigation, and it'll be a bloodbath. This is a ghost, Tracy. You can't fight a ghost with lawyers and private investigators. You just have to get out of its way. He stood up, his decision made, his course set. I'm leaving Port Charles. Tonight. I've got a bus ticket to nowhere. I'll change my name, disappear. It's the only way. He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the old Ronnie was there, the rogue, the scoundrel who had, against all odds and her better judgment, carved out a small, weird place in her life. I'm sorry, Tracy. For all of it. For being a screw-up. For being a burden. And for this. For laying this at your feet. But you had to know. You had to be careful. Tracy was speechless. A maelstrom of emotions warred within her, horror at the crime, fury at his cowardice, fear for his safety, and a profound, aching sadness for the broken man standing before her. She wanted to rage at him, to slap him, to demand he stay and face the consequences like a man. But she also wanted to hug him, to tell him it would be all right, to use the vast Quartermain power to make the problem go away. In the end, she did neither. She just stood there, her arms still crossed, a fortress under siege. Where will you go? She finally asked, her voice flat. Better you don't know, he said, offering a weak, sad smile. That way, if anyone ever asks, you can look them in the eye and tell the truth. He took a step toward the door, then paused, turning back one last time. Take care of yourself, Tracy. You're the toughest, smartest, most infuriating person I've ever known. Don't ever change. And with that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound as final as a coffin lid closing. Tracy remained rooted to the spot, leaning against her desk, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the hall until they were swallowed by the ambient noise of the hospital. She was alone. The board meeting, the corporate intrigue, the petty power struggles, it all felt trivial and distant, like a play she had been watching from a great height. Ronnie's confession had carved a hollow space inside her, filled with the chilling weight of his secret. He had murdered a man. He had lived with that secret for decades. And now, that secret had taken on a life of its own, a vengeful specter that had chased him out of her life, possibly forever. The Ronnie she knew, the schemer, the gambler, the occasional ally, was gone. In his place was a murderer and a fugitive, a man so haunted by his past that he had to vanish into the anonymity of the world to escape it. Tracy slowly walked around her desk and sank into her chair. The leather sighed under her weight. She looked at her hands, perfectly manicured, rings glittering under the office lights. They were the hands of a woman who commanded boardrooms, who wielded wealth as a weapon, who had faced down countless adversaries. But they felt useless now. There was no stock she could buy, no deal she could broker, no sharp-tongued remark that could fix this. A crime. A murder. The word echoed in the silent room. Ronnie, for all his flaws, had never seemed capable of that. Reckless, yes. Unethical, certainly. But a killer? The dissonance was jarring. It forced her to reevaluate every interaction, every shared moment, every time she had dismissed his shoddiness as harmless mischief. It had never been harmless. It had been rooted in a profound, hidden violence. And now, this unknown adversary. Someone who knew. Someone who was in Port Charles. A threat that had not only driven Ronnie away but had also, indirectly, connected itself to her. Say goodbye to your friend, the Quartermain. The words were a threat, a promise, a declaration that the chaos of Ronnie's life had now splashed onto hers. She thought about calling her son, Ned. Or Monica. Or even Luke, if she could ever find him. But what would she say? My criminal friend just confessed to a decades-old murder and has fled town because a mysterious avenger is after him? It sounded like the plot of a bad novel. And Ronnie was right, involving the police or her family could escalate the situation in unpredictable and dangerous ways. This was a shadow war, and you don't fight shadows with floodlights. Her 5 minutes had turned into half an hour. The board meeting was undoubtedly over, her absence noted, her power perhaps slightly diminished in the eyes of her rivals. For once, Tracy Quartermain found that she didn't care. There were more important things than corporate dominance. She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy streets of Port Charles. People scurried below, oblivious to the dark currents flowing just beneath the surface of their lives. Somewhere out there, Ronnie was heading for a bus station, a lone figure carrying a terrible secret and a suitcase full of fear. And somewhere else, another figure moved in the shadows, armed with a different kind of knowledge, a patient hunter whose quarry had just fled the cage. The world outside the window seemed less solid, less safe. A foundational crack had appeared in her reality. The knowledge Ronnie had imparted was a poison, and she was now its sole keeper in Port Charles. It was a burden she had never asked for, a consequence of her association with a man she had never fully approved of, yet had never been able to completely cast aside. Tracy Quartermain was a woman accustomed to controlling her environment, to shaping the narrative of her own life. But now, the narrative had been hijacked by a ghost from Ronnie's past. The finality of his departure, the chilling nature of his confession, and the looming, unknown threat left her with a feeling of profound vulnerability. The game had changed, and the stakes were no longer money or power, but something far more primal, survival. She turned away from the window, her decision made. She would tell no one. She would lock Ronnie's confession away, a toxic secret in the vault of her mind. She would go about her life, attend her meetings, wage her wars, and present a face of unshakable composure to the world. But beneath the surface, she would be vigilant. She would watch for the ghost Ronnie had warned her about, for the ripple of a stone thrown in a pond long before she had ever arrived. Ronnie was gone. His final episode in Port Charles had concluded not with a bang or a scheme, but with a whispered confession that had altered the very air she breathed. The hospital around her continued its endless cycle of life and death, unaware that within its walls, a different kind of wound had been inflicted, a wound that would not heal, a silence that would now scream in the quiet moments. The game was over for Ronnie. But for Tracy, a new, more dangerous one had just begun.